Hi, everyone. It's been a long time since lunch. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be back in Hong Kong. It's been a few years for me, so very excited to be here and to be here with these very talented gentlemen to talk about some important topics. And I'm going to start with an easy one, something simple.
Please.
And I think we're constantly thinking about media and it's our place in the world and how we reach people and how we can capture their attention. How do you think fashion media can break through the noise and create narratives that resonate with today's audience? What's the secret sauce? That's for each of you. Jose, do you want to start?
Sure. Well, hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so happy to be back in Hong Kong as well. It's first year as a student, so it's a very fun full circle moment. How can we break through? It's interesting because, before I started at Vogue, I was a designer, and during my fashion design career, I started freelance writing, and that happened through Instagram. I was blogging. I felt like I had something to say, so I was like, why not? And to me, the learning from that experience, the transition from something so independent and so free to going into, traditional media is the personal. The personal is really important when you're crafting a narrative, whether it's about a celebrity, whether it's about a brand and a designer, whether it's myself as an editor, as a writer. What am I about? What do I care about? What do you care about? And how can we make an interesting story about that? Because audiences want to hear a personal voice. They're less interested now, I think, in an institution.
Blake.
My turn. Well, nice to see everyone. It's also great to be back in Hong Kong. I spent a lot of my childhood here, so. I think what we have to remember is that culture has shifted a lot, and fashion more recent years has become very central to the language around culture, and the ability for us to really share stories through fashion, I think, has been more and more feasible and important to do nowadays than maybe 10 years ago when film was very much at the center, or film and music was maybe at the center of culture. I think fashion is something that everyone can connect to and really understand, their personal lives through that. I think for us at A Magazine, we kind of approach things in a different way. My role as an editor is always to place my brain into a designer's brain and try and find a way to understand their personal world. I think it's a bit different in how you approach your work, Jose, but I think the ability to translate someone's mindset, someone's way of thinking into writing, into film, into podcast. I think that also the role of media has shifted a lot is really important, and it's an amazing time actually for media as it's shifting.
I think A Magazine is a very personal publication, actually.
It's very personal, for the designer. And we can talk about maybe the process later, but for the editor, it's almost as we remove ourselves from it.
Thank you for having me as well. I think for China, fashion media is really, really competitive, and to really stand out, because W China has just been in the market for nearly 2 years. So we really come in and then think, what can we do differently? So what we think is that other than just creating content or covers, we want to creating lasting, meaningful moments that nobody else can create. And then we achieved in doing so, like for our first issue cover, because we're celebrating, it was the same week that President Macron visiting China, celebrating 60 years anniversary of Sino-France relationship. So we thought, what can be more interesting than having the most famous actress from China and France together on a cover? So we were able to do so by bringing Gong Li and Isabelle Huppert together for the very first time. And then, of course, they're very hard to be on one cover, and for them to collaboratively joining a cover is really, really hard to do. And then also, we celebrated each issue with the event. So every single issue, we do an event. So when there's Director's Eye, which is in the same month that Cannes Film Festival is, we host a party in Cannes. So normally we'll expand the voice of a magazine with the event, so to make it more meaningful and impactful. And it was the same thing with the last issue. We had the the cover for Gongli as well. But then again, we innovated by not shooting the cover, but by doing a video by the legendary videographer and director Christopher Doyle, Du Kefeng, which is relevant to Hong Kong as well. And then we took each frame. So the cover, all the images are taken from the frames of the short film. And then we did an inaugural event, a debut of the film, at the same time in Shanghai and Beijing, and at the same hour in Paris as well. So simultaneously on the same day. Yeah.
I'm kind of tired after hearing all of that.
It is. But then it is the market is so competitive that you have to think about something extraordinary to make it more impactful. So meaningful moments.
Yeah, so being present, ever present, and being personal. And I think, Alex, in particular, you're creating very new narratives. You know, the mixing of these cultures, and but from a Chinese point of view, I think is really, for me, being based in Asia and seeing that it's just it's very vibrant, very energetic, and the way you execute it as well. How do you incorporate these unique elements of Chinese culture into each issue, each month, or each moment?
Yeah, so we really see the Chinese, the essence of Chinese design in two things. The first is historical or traditional, which we see it through crafts. And the other one is more newness. So we have many famous Chinese designers here as well. So and then again, going back to our core to create meaningful and interesting moments. So we do not just report or shoot their pieces or their design. It's more about creating something truly and unique to us. So for example, 2 months ago, we did a project. So we invited 8 Chinese fashion designers to go back to Anhui, which is Xuancheng. So when we talk about traditional papers, xuanzhi, so xuanzhi is really coming from Xuancheng in Anhui. So all the 8 designers created 8 pieces using xuanzhi for us. So it is in our archive. And I think we are one of the few very few fashion media that is trying to build our own archive through curated items to content. So in this way, we created something that's only unique to us. And then also, we also want to expand it in real life experiences. So we also have a museum called WM House in Chengdu, so which we do curations and exhibitions all the time throughout the year. So these items will be displayed in our own exhibition as well. Again, to really maximize the voice and the impact.
So I sense it's this idea of like almost marketing and artistry at the same time.
At the same time, and creating something new and not just about reporting or just doing an article. Yeah.
How do you think like a brand can execute that and get it to purchase? You know, how can a brand use those techniques and end up selling their items?
Of course, I think we are acting more like brands because now brands are more 360, right? They have a lot of events. At the same time, they have campaigns on social and print as well. So we are trying to do same or more. So we are in real life and we are online and also on social and print as well. So I think for brands to really have an impactful campaign is less important than having a consistency in their branding and voice. So I think if you look at some of the most valued brands, like from Hermes to Chanel to all those interesting brands, they are the reason why of their valuation is because they are very consistent. And if you look at other brands who are less consistent, one day they're this and the other day they're not. They're that. It's less. They're on a roller coaster. So I think it's more about a consistent story.
Yeah, authentic, consistent story.
Exactly.
Are there any examples that stand out, like successful examples that stand out for you, of brands' narratives?
I think a lot. Like from the recent one, Jack Muse, who everyone loves. I think from day one, his story is consistent. And also another case, a recent case, is the Loewe exhibition. I'm sure some of you were there. And I really love the Loewe craftsmanship exhibition in Shanghai. It's because after 10 years, you sort of see the whole picture of what Louis Vuitton has been doing in craftsmanship. And this is a consistent story. And also through collecting, through collaborating with artists, with craftsmen, you really see where the brand is going and where the brand is from. So I think this is really resonates with the audience. And this brings them clients again and again, I think.
Blake, you recently took over a magazine.
It's nearly 2 years now, but yes.
Already, oh my gosh, so fast. I know, the media has changed a lot, and the things we talk about, and that authenticity and what you stand for is very, very important. And I'm wondering how can storytelling be used to promote positive change in the fashion industry?
Yeah, I mean, the way that A Magazine works is that we curate every issue with a designer, and it's not with a brand. And I think that's what I try and make very clear when I have these conversations with the designers and the brands, so that we have a very clear personal story behind the projects that we're doing. And I think the fact that we're able to work with, Glenn Martins, he's working at that time at Y Projects and at Diesel, but we were really able to understand who Glenn was, where he's from, how he grew up. The fact that we shot in his hometown of Bruges over like 30 pages, bringing all these incredible Belgian models. The fact that we were able to work with one of his childhood friends who happened to be a stained glass master who was taking care of his grandfather's stained glass. That these are real kind of authentic stories to him, and that we can only make a very clear and real kind of product story with these kinds of very personal backgrounds. What was the other question? I lost my train of thought.
How do you think that kind of storytelling can be used by a brand to?
Yeah, I think that leaning on the designer's personality and real background will really help push brands forward. I think what oftentimes brands, when they do storytelling really well, they have a very clear community around them, people who they engage with regularly, with consistency, and people who can actually have a dialogue also with the brand. I think that that's one thing that is very clear, that the ones that are successful are the brands that are able to actually have a dialogue with their community, including the consumer at the end.
But it's a bit complicated sometimes because are you aspirational or are you relatable? Like, I think that's kind of a dance that even as a media, like as a legacy media.
Absolutely, and I think that's a shifting kind of winds of the storytelling space. I think that no one is necessarily getting it perfect yet. And I think we're still evolving and trying to figure out what and how we do that. But I do really think as we move forward, this idea of dialogue is really important. Consumers are becoming more and more wanting to be integrated into the stories of the brands, and vice versa. The brands also need the consumers to also like engage, the opposite way. And so I think that's really how we're kind of going to have to move forward. This idea of like marketing, I think, is a bit shifted. We're not necessarily, when you look at a luxury brand or a fashion brand, I think what we'll be seeing as we move, as we develop, as we shift, less of this idea that a brand will be telling people what to buy and sharing. It's more about sharing their history and their legacy, and then the consumer is going to be the ones that are responding and seeing how they want to engage in that storytelling. Yeah,
I think time is very valuable. So who do you want to spend your time with? Right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
You want your space.
Yeah.
So when you make each issue, you're spending a lot of time with whoever you choose. How do you approach that selection?
Well, it takes a lot of negotiations with designers and the brands that they work with to get them on board. Designers are very, very busy nowadays, doing 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 collections a year. I think for A Magazine, because we've been a publication that's been around for 25 years, actually, we're celebrating our 25th anniversary next year, we're very clear about who comes before and after. So, the last issue we did with Glenn Martins, and the previous one was Peter Doe, and the one before that was Sakai. all of these designers are very, and the one before that was Erdem, and I think Erdem is important because we're often expected to want to work with the most innovative, the coolest, and I love Erdem, let me be clear, but he might not be considered one of the leading young designers of the stage. And I think for us at A Magazine, we need to be able to kind of keep our readership on their toes and keep fashion industry on their toes, just to make sure that we're not always working with the young, cool designers. That said, we've always at the beginning very much worked with the designers early on in the career, but I think it's about bouncing back and forth. And I think it's important as A Magazine, as we move forward, to kind of expand our scope. We are a Paris-based, started in Antwerp publication, but looking outside of the borders of Europe, I think has been very important. For my first issue as editor-in-chief, I was very clear. We had just done Sakai with José, but it was very clear for me that I wanted to do something with Peter. I think it was a really important moment for, I guess, Americans to see a person of Asian descent kind of step into a new space and be able to explore that kind of story. And then at the other side, to go back to Europe and work with someone who's very close to our home, Glenn, seeing as he's Belgian. It's this kind of flip-flop back and forth. And hopefully we'll expand outside of the markets. And I would love to do something in Africa and South America, but we're always looking for new designers to work with.
And I think the big question for some of the young designers that are here is how can they balance artistic integrity, which is really, you talked about that and you didn't talk about commerciality. How do they balance those two? This is for everybody, and we're all living in different places, so I think we all have very different points of view. Maybe we start with José.
Yes, of course. I think what's interesting here is to find, we have always to remember that fashion is an industry, right? Fashion is a business. We are in the business of selling something, whether it's a product, a dream, aspiration. They sort of all end up in the same boat, right? In the same thing. And what's important is for designers to find the balance between understanding what they're about and what the fantasy is, what the dream that they're selling is, and what is the practical, real interpretation of that dream, right? I think a designer like Rick Owens is really interesting, right? Rick is a designer whose aesthetic is so clear to so many of us who know his work. But then the way he's built his business, you have Dark Shadow, right? Dark Shadow is the entry level into Rick Owens, and it's cargo pants and it's t-shirts and it's tank tops, and they're cut in this very specific singular way. They define his world and his uniform, but they're accessible. Tom Brown is another good example, right? It's a designer, an American designer who's very conceptual on the runway, but has built his business based on the gray suit. It's a uniform, right? So what is the balance between that fantastic idea, what's that dream, and then what is the practical execution of that will invite people to be a part of your dream, I think is what's important.
Yeah, it's like your signature.
Exactly. And again, it's if there is this big fantasy, this big artistic or conceptual fantasy, what is a practical product that will invite people to become a part of that world?
For me, I'm most interested in young designers pushing their creativity as far as they can, which ultimately creates a signature point of view. There is one story where I told a young designer, I questioned them, why are you making a white t-shirt? I can go anywhere to buy a white t-shirt. And they hold that to me still, unfortunately. But I think that ultimately young designers, what they do sell is creativity. The way to break through is to be as authentic to themselves and their point of view as possible. Otherwise, you can buy a white t-shirt anywhere,
Right, you're buying into something.
You're buying into something. It's a world. It's a world, it's a point of view. It's an ethos. It's a sensitivity. Those are the things that at least I buy into, and I would expect the majority of our colleagues and other people who are interested in the fashion space to be buying into that. Yeah.
I agree with both of them. not just to save time. But I think the essence is that to really, I think it's just like doing media, to really know who you are and what you want to achieve. If you want to be crazy and if you want to have this parti pris, this uniqueness in your design, you can. And you don't even have to think about business or how to have a business sense. You can be the craziest. I think if you went in that way to just build the dream, like Jose said, and then to really have this very unique dream, you don't need to worry about the business side. Because maybe if you're crazy enough, you will be a marketing tool, or you will be someone that you can be successful in your business in another way. But if you want to have a balancing of both from the commercial side and creativity, you have to really think about the structure of the company, have to think about which people you bring on board, and which is your client other than your creativity. So you have to really think through of who you are and what you want to achieve. Yes.
Jose, you're based in New York. You cover shows in New York. You travel to Paris. You've been traveling to Shanghai and in reviewing shows. And I'm wondering, what are some of the most innovative and impactful ways you've seen brands or designers use storytelling to connect?
This is really interesting because I love a fashion show. There's nothing more fun for me to just sit there and understand what someone's a story someone's trying to tell me. But because there are so many fashion shows, and you know this very well because we run into each other a lot of them, designers are starting to find different ways of translating their ideas, right? I think a story, I was thinking about this yesterday on the flight here, about a few shows that have stood out recently. One of them is a show actually Blake was a part of. I think around a year ago, our mutual friend Sarah Lopez, she is a young designer based in New York. Her brand is A Company. She put together as a show, as a way of presenting her collection, a staging of Antigone, this Greek tragedy, right? It felt very timely, as sort of this idea of how community deals with grief. But above all, it showed her clothes beautifully because these were people walking, talking, acting, performing, people in the New York community that we love, that we look up to, like Blake or like Jeremy O'Hara's. And that was a really impactful show. It's also a really fun thing to write about, right? Because it's a different way of looking at what fashion can do in the staging of a show. Going back to Rick Owens, for instance, this summer in June, he put together a show with 200 people, like students, teachers at fashion schools in Paris, part of his team. They were all dressed in sort of versions of the same look. And it was less about us as an audience understanding what the look was and more about what he was trying to tell us, right? This sort of parade, it felt both imperial and as a protest. There was like something interesting there, right? And he did it again in September for Women's Wear. So I think there's so much you can do in the context of that fashion show that to me, those are a couple of examples that stand out. Again, what are you about? Show me what the brand is about, what you as a designer care about.
We're almost out of time, so I'm going to ask one final question to the panel. We have to be very brief. How do you think media can help nurture a topic that we all think about now that is very much of our times, diverse and inclusive fashion ecosystem?
Yeah, I think we have a responsibility in media to tell stories in the best way they can be told, right? But that also means finding interesting stories that have been untold. Or if we're sort of, if we're all talking about the same brand, in which way can I tell this the best? And I go back to the personal, right? If we're talking about something like Vogue, for instance, Vogue is aspirational, but myself as an editor, as a writer, I am relatable, right? So I become a funnel, whether that is to tell the story of a designer, to tell a story from the Vogue side. And that's also where inclusivity comes in. That's where diversity comes in, right? I was born and raised in Latin America, in Bolivia. I am an immigrant in the US. I have a very specific point of view, right? That to me by itself creates an inclusive story. You always have to think of that. Who are you? What do you care about?
Alex?
I think he basically answered everything. I think I totally agree. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say this quickly. I mean, it's our role as editors to be curious and to not tell the same story that you've heard over and over and over. And I think what's really interesting is that because the media landscape is shifting and becoming already diverse, you know, I'm half Chinese, half Scottish, grew up in Canada, spends a lot of time in China and in Hong Kong. We have a, you know, Chinese person, you know, here. We have someone who's Bolivian, an American who lives in Tokyo. The fact that the landscape itself is shifting and the perspectives within the landscapes are shifting only leads to us having a more diverse space. And it's our role to kind of like, yeah, to be very distinct in it as well.
I agree. I think it's one of the most exciting times to be in media. The most challenging, but the most exciting. Yeah. Well, this was all too brief. Hopefully we can do a part 2 at some point. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you all for listening.
Thank you.